Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. Work at a construction site in southern Ontario has been put on hold after ancestral remains were found. The excavations were for a proposed parking lot at the Ontario Power Generation head office in Oshawa, Ontario. Annette Francis has more.
Things are quiet here at the site where remains were found within large excavated soil deposits 2 weeks ago. According to a statement from Ontario Power Generation, or OPG, a bone fragment was found during archaeological work at the site. In a joint statement by several area First Nations, they say OPG and its contractor did not follow the proper Heritage Act procedures. Alderville First Nation Chief Tainer Simpson says the excavation started a few months ago without an archaeological assessment.
And once we found out that none had been done, we asked for a stop to the excavation. There were already soil piles on site. So the proponent, OPG, agreed to halt everything, and they also agreed to sift all of the piles that were there. So it was estimated that it was going to take 40 days of screening and sifting all the soil piles to do it all.
Former Chief Dave Mowat was there 10 years ago when this plaque was erected to educate the public of the area. He's now a senior Indigenous engagement advisor for Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. Mowat agrees proper procedures weren't followed.
There's 4 stages in the archaeological assessment process, stage 1 to 4. And 4 can mean mitigation and excavation of sites. But it seems to me that there was a lack of oversight, complete oversight that should have occurred. Again, it's not a surprise to me because it continues to happen. With the level of development occurring in Ontario, Southern Ontario, it's almost like our prehistory is being eradicated from the ground. That's my lament is that with such development and, to coin a term, paving over paradise to put up a parking lot.
Simpson says the full scale of the destruction won't be known until all the material has been screened. The site is located near the shores of Lake Ontario at a historic area called Scugog Carrying Place.
And this was an area where our people would meet at all times of the year. It's where the north shore of Lake Ontario met the Trent River system, and this is where a lot of trade would happen, a lot of ceremony would happen, and a lot of deals, like trade deals, would be made. So this was a hub of activity, and it was also in an area where on the shores of the rivers and the lake there, where people would bury their relatives once they passed on.
Simpson says in spite of receiving an apology from OPG last week, more work needs to be done.
I think this is where the dialogue and negotiations would become forefront. So obviously there's some work that we need to do with OPG. We need to reframe our understanding. And I think we just have to sit down at the table and really talk about what our partnership looks like moving forward.
According to OPG's statement, it is committed to working with First Nations to ensure a full investigation is complete. Simpson says it could take up to a year to sift through every pile of soil here, but says the search shouldn't end until every bone fragment is found and returned to a safe resting place. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Oshawa, Ontario.
Thanks, Annette. Thursday marked day 2 of the First Nations Summit in Gatineau, Quebec. The idea behind the summit is for the Liberal government to consult with First Nations on which economic projects are in the national interest and how the government should proceed. APTN's Fraser Needham reports.
Mark Carney says he wants to hear from First Nations on how best to proceed on economic projects that are deemed in the national interest. This is the Prime Minister speaking to media prior to the beginning of the second day of the summit.
And so the level of engagement, the seniority of engagement, I'm here, I'll be here all day with my ministers, and principally here to listen to about that how and that engagement.
And here's Carney speaking again about the importance of the government listening to and consulting with First Nations in his opening speech.
And the emphasis on listening, Ishko Day. We are here to listen, and we are starting as we mean to go forward, by listening, engaging, working together.
There were numerous pleas from First Nations leaders to slow down on the passage of Bill C-5, the government's signature piece of economic development legislation that Indigenous groups say could be used to override their rights. The Liberals rammed the piece of legislation through Parliament and the Senate in 2 weeks with virtually no committee consultation in the spring. Speaking outside the summit on Thursday morning, Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepanek says she was disappointed the Prime Minister's staff decided to prevent media from covering her keynote speech, something she wanted them to hear.
They must have just made that decision. Yeah, of course we're not the ones organizing today. We didn't, rightfully so. The Assembly of First Nations, of course, walks a fine line, as many people, know how that can be.
Southern Chiefs Organization Grand Chief Jerry Daniels says he understands the Prime Minister wants to fast-track key economic projects and cut through red tape. But he says Carney may be unrealistic when it comes to the creation of a major projects office.
The big push here, I think, is trying to create a framework for consultation, a framework for how are they going to see economic development or large-scale projects move throughout Canada, and they want to create a one-shop model that's going to work for everybody. I don't think that necessarily works. You have different cultures, different beliefs right across the country, and so some of us do things in a different way.
But the Prime Minister does have his supporters when it comes to Bill C-5, and one of them is Chinapaqua Dakota Nation Chief Clayton Brown.
It brings a lot of clarity to our nation where projects and like the oil pipelines, True North corridor. These are the things that we feel that we can benefit from.
But at the same time, AFN Regional Chief for British Columbia, Terry Chichi, says the Carney government has missed an incredible opportunity by not including First Nations next week in the First Minister's meeting on the Trump tariffs and failing to seriously engage them on how best to move forward in these troubled economic times.
I think the issue is frustration, really frustration from First Nations, because quite simply we could have been part of the solution and really having to deal with this existential crisis that is, from the Trump administration.
Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
To the wildfire situation now, and officials say there are just under 13,000 Manitobans evacuated from 9 communities due to wildfires in the province. 2 new shelters have opened up in Winnipeg to accommodate those who have fled their homes. There are more than 6,000 beds available in the provincially run shelters for any future evacuations. Hotel rooms are set aside for evacuees with higher medical needs. Officials say that on Monday, 705 more people were moved to hotels from shelters, with a total of 68 hotels providing rooms. The fire danger level is high to very high in most of Manitoba and is especially extreme in the northeast region. The wildfire near Garden Hill First Nation is still very active, but there have been no reported structure losses. Despite many fires burning near communities, forecasted winds and weather have officials believing no other communities are currently under threat. Wildfires are wreaking havoc in Saskatchewan, so the Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency has called in firefighters from outside Canada to help battle the blazes. Video journalist Rachel May has been following that story.
The SPSA has called on partners from across the province, but also from across Canada, the United States, and right around the world.
The fires have forced evacuations and blocked vital roads. SPSA chairperson Tim McLeod said in a virtual press conference that while help has been coming from the U.S., 2 more countries have now joined the effort.
We've received firefighting supports from nearly every province and territory and from several American states, including Alaska, Colorado, and Washington. Last week, Quebec once again sent 2 aircraft and an additional 100 wildfire personnel. This week, we welcomed 40 firefighters from Australia, and we will welcome 40 additional firefighters from Mexico in the next few days.
There are currently 48 active wildfires in Saskatchewan, with 10 communities under evacuation. Residents from Canoe Lake, Jans Bay, La Plonge, Lac La Plonge Resort Division, Montreal Lake, Beauval, Pine House, Pachinak, and English River First Nation have been relocated across the province, from Meadow Lake to Regina. The road to Pachinak is now closed, and with that community evacuated, supplies for firefighters have to be flown in. Athabasca MLA Leroy LaLiberty says more support is needed for evacuees and for those who stayed behind to help fight the fires.
Put your shoes in the people that have to leave their homes with a bag, not knowing if they're going to come home to a home.
He says people might be tired of hearing about northern fires, but it's not just the evacuees being affected.
But these fires are destroying our traditional territory. You think about all of the animals, the medicines that people pick, and that, you know, for a lot of people they see bush, but for us that's home.
When asked what he wants to see, LaLiberty called on the Saskatchewan Party to step up, provide evacuees with timely support, and have the Premier admit that the province wasn't prepared for a fire season that happens every year.
To Premier Scott Moe, do your job. Stand up, do your job. Premier Moe, and I'm saying the same thing to the Sask Party government.
Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
Our Truth in Politics panel will be here after the break to give their take on the First Nations Summit. Stick around. Welcome back. As we've been reporting, First Nations leadership is in Gatineau, Quebec, meeting with the Prime Minister and other federal cabinet ministers about Bill C-5. The federal bill and a similar bill in Ontario are also now the focus of legal action in Ontario, launched by 9 First Nations who say the legislation violates rights and threatens the land and water. However, there are some First Nations who see this moment as an economic opportunity. For more, our Truth and Politics panel is here. Negon Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press, and helping us out this week is lawyer, professor, and activist Pam Palmater. Pam, Negon, great to have you with us. Negon, as with anything, of course, not all First Nations are opposed to this federal bill. A number in Alberta have shown their support. 10 First Nations in Manitoba announced earlier this week they see the legislation as a tremendous opportunity and back the idea of a trade route and utility corridor to Hudson Bay. Is it likely the feds will move ahead or want to move ahead with projects that already have First Nation support?
We saw some gesture to that by the Prime Minister in his speech this morning, sort of listing off successful initiatives. But I will say that if you look a little deeper into those initiatives, they created a great deal of fracture in communities between chiefs and grassroots people, especially when it came to the environment, the things that Pam are talking about. I said just a minute ago that this bill may not be in the interests of First Nations, and that's who I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is those elements within First Nations that don't always feel represented by their chiefs and councils, which are designations by the Indian Act. And there are, for example, hereditary chiefs that traveled to Ottawa, and time will tell, although I've been looking on my social media fields whether they got into that meeting or not. They certainly were not invited. And there is a kind of move within the federal government to want to work with certain First Nations and not others, and sort of talk about those First Nations that want to co-own resource projects like mines, pipelines, certain energy projects, and so on. It has been called by several First Nations who wrote letters to the government this week a divide and conquer tactic that we know well in the past. And we think back to that meeting that Stephen Harper offered to First Nations by saying we will handpick those First Nations leaders, or we will certainly only recognize certain First Nations leaders who want to work with us, and we'll work with them. They will find that project that has a real big dead end as that approach. And the other problem, of course, is that if I were organizing this meeting, I would not ask chiefs to come to Ottawa. I would have sent the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, or the ministers that are responsible for this, to First Nations as just a gesture of building trust. Trust has been the number one issue here, which is easily fixable. If you, for instance, worked regionally, which is what the Prime Minister did mention in the meeting and in his announcement this morning, that there will be regional meetings, I actually think that will get things farther done to try to create some sense of unanimity in those regions around certain projects. And I think that certainly would get away from the divide and conquer tactic that this looks like.
Pam, the flip side, of course, as this summit is happening, 9 First Nations in Ontario have already launched a legal challenge over the federal government's C-5, Ontario's Bill 5. How do you think this might play out, and do you think we might see more legal challenges?
I think you will see more legal challenges, and not just from First Nations. There's a whole host of informal groups, like Negon was referencing, community members. There's Indigenous women groups that are very concerned about what these projects will do, environmental groups, conservation groups, human rights groups, and they've been known to come together before to challenge on a wide variety of fronts, not just on the Indigenous rights aspect, but the environmental is really big here. And I think all of this is being conflated in the media as those who support the legislation specifically, i.e. violating Indigenous rights and environmental protections, versus some First Nations saying, hey, we're open to agreements, we're open to development, because no one has said all First Nations are against development or projects or collaborations. It's the ability, the constitutional and international human rights ability to say no, yes, yes with conditions, or you know what, maybe this project just simply can't go ahead. It's the ability to say and look at all of these projects and say, this doesn't work. This one is just too damaging and too risky. Oh, this project does work. Okay, let's collaborate on this. And how are we going to work that out? By having a piece of legislation that just allows to circumvent that process means it gets conflated in the media, and Canadians are saying, oh, look, First Nations, they're just trying to stymie progress. They're just trying to stymie our ability to counter Trump tariffs, when those two have not been connected. There's been no economic analysis that shows, okay, rushing on projects will somehow counter Trump tariffs. Those two things aren't directly related. And so part of the problem is going to be all of this political confusion around who's saying what and what does it mean and what's going to happen in the end. And at the end of the day, it's every single impacted First Nation that gets to say yes or no to these projects and what those conditions could be. So it doesn't matter if 10, 20, or 50 First Nations say, I like this legislation. If they're not impacted, that's not going to be relevant in a specific territory. And we kind of all have to remember that this is really about our overall well-being, and that includes Canadians here.
Pam, Niigaan, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks to you both.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And you can hear and watch more of that conversation on the Truth and Politics podcast and on our APTN News YouTube page. Of course, we're always looking for your feedback or story ideas. Here's how you can continue the conversation with us. If you have a story you want to share, you can send us an email to news@aptn.ca. To read and watch our stories, go to our website, aptnnews.ca. You can also find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. The Back to Potash Festival gets underway this weekend, but those attending may be greeted at the doors by more than just volunteers. More on that after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And Kevin Hobbs recently attended the Soaring Spirit Powwow at Stony Creek and was shared with us this photo of some of the dancers enjoying the experience. Thanks, Kevin. You can send your photos to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecasts. Starting on the East Coast, showers and 23 in Fredericton, 28 with rain in Halifax, 18 with showers in Kuujjuaq, rain in Nain, and a high of 12. Sun's out and 24 in Montreal, showers and 19 for Chibougamau. 23 under sunny skies in Sault Ste. Marie, North Bay, and Toronto. 22 in Thunder Bay, showers and 23 in Sioux Lookout. 22 with rain in God's Lake and Norway House. 24 in Winnipeg, 23 with showers in Dauphin. 24 in Regina, Estevan, and Saskatoon. Smoky and 26 in Buffalo Narrows, 23 with smoke in La Ronge. In northern Alberta, 28 in High Level, Fort Chipewyan, and Fort McMurray. 24 in Edmonton, 27 and sunny in Lethbridge. Showers and 21 in Vancouver and Victoria. 19 with rain in Prince George, showers and 23 in Smithers. 19 in Old Crow, rain and 24 for Whitehorse and Mayo. 27 with rain in Yellowknife, 21 and showers in Norman Wells. Cloudy and 6 in Sax Harbor, 12 in Paulatuck. 12 in Chesterfield, sunny and 17 for Baker Lake. 5 in Resolute, 9 in Arctic Bay. This weekend marks the annual Métis Nation Saskatchewan Back to Batoche Festival, running July 17th to 20th at the Batoche National Historic Site. The festival brings Métis people together for a weekend of culture, history, and tradition. On Friday morning, festival goers will be greeted with a peaceful demonstration planned for outside of the grounds. Campers have already started arriving with tents and trailers, preparing for 4 days of Métis events. Some of the entertainment happening includes a grand entry Friday morning, chuck wagon and chariot races, as well as concerts. Earlier this week, M&S announced 2 elected representatives previously barred from their swearing in will have a makeup ceremony, though details on timing or their status at the provincial Métis Council meetings remain unclear. As a result, a grassroots group is organizing a peaceful protest outside the festival gates Friday, stating in their poster that the demonstration is about holding the M&S government accountable, not disrupting festivities or citizens. And that's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. You can find a whole lot more on the First Nations Summit in Gatineau over on our website, aptnnews.ca. And Creason will be here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for your first look at the day's news. I'm Dennis Ward, Marcy McGuitch. Thanks for being with us. Stick around for an encore presentation of Face to Face. That's coming up next. Have a great night.